Hello everyone. So my name is Sabriya Stukes. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer for Bio. And as my badge says, I'm here to talk science. So really excited to be the one to be moderating this discussion after two fantastic pitches. As with the other panels, what I would love to do is have each one of our panelists introduce themselves, give a little bit of background on how you got to where you're at, and especially with our founders, I think maybe giving a little bit of insight into the biomaterial that you work with for the audience would be helpful to level set everyone with what we're about to talk about this afternoon.
Hey everyone, honored to be here. Great pitches from our other biomaterials companies today. I'm very honored to be a Bio alumni myself in Bio New York second batch. My name is Zimri Hinshaw, and I'm the CEO and founder of Bucha Bio. We make plant and bacteria-based materials that can be made for other alternatives and replacements, and also things that are very, very novel and new, like Hikari, which is kind of like stained glass. So we're partnered with New Climate Ventures here, and honored to have Eric and see Ross as well.
As Zimri just alluded to, Eric Rubenstein, managing partner, New Climate Ventures. We invest in carbon reduction and avoidance technology companies, direct and indirect, so broad spectrum of companies in that space. Biomaterials is one that we're particularly excited about. Excited to be here. We are invested in Bucha Bio and have partnered with them for some time, and huge fans of the Bio program, and excited to be here.
And then I'm Ross McBee. I'm a co-founder and CSO at TomTex. At TomTex, we're making the next generation of biomaterials from waste streams. Important sort of foundational stuff for us is it has to be biodegradable, it has to be 100% bio-based, and it has to come from something that is doing damage to the planet right now. So a waste stream that is not just a co-product, but is actually a byproduct that ends up in the trash or ends up in a landfill, something like that. We exist in a similar space to Zimri, I think. And it'll be actually a lot of fun to talk through. So how do we sort of approach them? And I think probably a lot of the same problems thinking through this.
So the first question I have is a pretty general one, but I think an important one, because as you think about spaces like therapeutics or genomics that have been around for a really long time, it's very easy to know what questions they are answering. And so, why biomaterials? Eric, I know you said you were excited to be investing in this space. So I think it'd be interesting to hear about why, but also from Ross and Zimri, why should founders or individuals be looking to biomaterials to solve, some of the problems that we are seeing today?
I can take a crack at the sort of second one. This is going to sound bad, but I think that imagine a nightmare scenario here where we spend the next 20 years solving for carbon. And then we end up, like the beginning of the movie WALL-E, just sort of covered in trash. Because now we have this massive oversupply of really, really low-cost inputs that are no longer being burned, and they can get turned into materials. And you just run out of control without actually ever really solving the fundamental problem, which is about our relationship with nature. So that's like the sort of climate ecological answer to that question. The scientific answer, like why is it interesting, right? It is also, there's also a sort of plastics connection, I think, right? If you think about the origins of plastics, the early days of plastics, these all begin as mimics. They begin as fake ivory and fake tortoiseshell and fake silk for the fibers. But once you get to, DuPont at the World's Fair, they're not selling alternatives to anything anymore. They're selling a new vision of the future, a new set of materials that can do new things. And I think we both think that biomaterials are right at this edge, right? There's a whole bunch of reasons why the fundamental nano and microstructure and the physics of biomaterials and the way this is efficient with carbon, is efficient with sort of production processes, and is able to do a lot with a little, sort of from a sophistication perspective, is a really fundamental shift, thinking about basically bulk materials as nanomaterials rather than bulk materials as just a big pool of plastic you've crammed into some shape. And so there's a super, super interesting class of problems in there that clearly I'm spending too long talking about. I'm really attracted to, that then can feed back into that first problem, right? Can then allow us to be much more efficient, can allow us to actually get at the root of our problem with the climate and our relationship with the planet in a way that just sort of a less bad solution never will.
And I'll chime in. So I come out of the commodities world, so commodities trading, and as you look at kind of the history of commodities, and I'll use electricity as the low-hanging fruit here because EVs are such a big deal today, and they were also expected to be a big deal 20 years ago. It takes time for technology to catch up and develop in a way where it can properly be adopted into society, right? So if you look at the power industry, same thing with wind and solar, how it was very expensive and you brought that cost curve down. So now that it's cheaper than making power in any other form, really. So you've created this renewable way that's better for the planet and that we can use every day. Similarly, you haven't had that kind of disruption. You've had a little bit, let's say in the food space now, you've had a little bit in, say, with biofuels in the fuel space, but in the plastic space, we really haven't had that kind of disruption yet. But now we're at this point where technology is meeting with that, and you can use you can create biomaterials that can actually be drop-in replacements for what we use. So looking forward to that actually being the future, whether it's biomaterials, recycled products, all of this I put in a similar category.
You know, and I just think that these materials that we use today, made of petrochemicals, which the production of is so carbon intensive, so destructive, the chemicals that are used to treat animal products, like I'm looking across and I see a sea of very fashionable people wearing beautiful things. But those things are made of animal leather that's tanned with chromium. You know, we're surrounded by paint that's made of petrochemical plastic, TVs, petrochemical plastic, and this stage, most likely petrochemical plastic. And so the scope of what we're able to replace, the scope of what we're trying to do is huge, it's massive. And that's in itself a great problem and a great business opportunity. And I think a reason why both scientifically it's a pursuit worthy as well as a business one.
And so based on your answers, I can definitely see connecting the dots between, you know, looking or creating new biomaterials to answer certain questions about things like climate change or, you know, overuse of plastics and things like that, and why, you know, someone from an organization called New Climate Ventures would invest in biomaterial companies. And something that you said, Zimri, that reminded me of a conversation Ross and I literally just had a few seconds ago is, you know, why do you think biomaterials and fashion is the kind of first step into getting a company off the ground in this space, right? I mean, the title of this panel is Engineered Biomaterials. Sometimes people think about biomaterials solely in kind of a medical device or medical technology way. We just heard, like I said, two great pitches from companies who are, you know, making footholds in fashion. So what do you think about fashion resonates with people, or why are you using that as a way to get people to care about biomaterials?
Fashion has always moved a lot faster than most other industries. They're making statements that are 5-10 years, you know, from another industry picking it up. And so the pace of that is so fast. The cycles that they move on is so fast, and the way that they adopt new technologies has always been cutting edge, you know. Massive companies like the Adidases of the world, they're not just fashion companies, they're deep technology companies that are deeply invested in developing these kinds of materials. And so I think that approach to technology, that approach to sustainable materials, you know, that's why fashion first for us.
Yeah, I think that's the space and the amount of investment that goes into this, I think, is a good point. The other one is there's an economic reason and there's like a cultural reason. The economic reason is that this is a space where there's lots of margin, right? Like luxury fashion, there's a huge amount of stuff where you can slot in, and people are actually willing to pay green premiums for things if you can demonstrate that it actually like checks all the boxes that you need. That's clear. The other one is slightly more woo-woo, I guess. It's basically that I don't think the problems that we have, the largest suite of climate crises that we're encountering is necessarily one that you can address using pure techno-economics. I think this is about a relationship between people and materials and people and the planet. And if you want to work on that problem, you have to do it with something that has cultural valence. And clothes have cultural valence, right? What people wear is intimately connected to their sense of selves and their sense of expression and the way they relate to themselves and the planet and the materials that these things are made of. I think that's a super interesting opportunity, again, to get at kind of some of the core issues here beyond just like moving a percentage number down or up.
Yeah, there's an element of consumer education that's needed, and the consumer education piece is important because if you can get the consumer excited, then you can get the corporation excited. If you get the corporation excited, then you can scale these things infinitely, right? So that's something that I think is super important. And
how then do you get a consumer excited about wearing a purse that was made from shrimp waste, or pants that might be made from mycelium, or because it can feel very, in some ways, couture, right? I know, Ross, you just had a fashion show with some of you, with TômTex and a very well-known designer. But how do you close that chasm from, okay, I'm seeing these things on a runway, and this is something I could wear, versus something I could wear every day?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to not lie to people about what you're actually doing. Right? People are really, really tired of greenwashing. This is like a fundamental issue in this space. Is stuff that is sustainable, and then what that means, it's like 10% bio, but like that's horseshit. Come on. So like, and consumers are getting really sensitive to this. They're really tired of this. So when you come to this problem,
investors as well.
Yeah, and the brands too. Like if you go talk to people, and there's somebody else in this space that is a sustainable option, and then it's coated in polyurethane, they know that, and they don't want to work with it. Right? They understand this. So making sure that you are like working on the problem that you say you're working on, right? So again, no petro, renewable inputs, like all these things have to be there as the ground floor. Once you're there, I actually think a lot of this demand is already extant. I think you use something like a fashion show as a way of demonstrating that this is real. Like proving that this is a thing in the real world, because there's the other version of saying couture is that it's kind of mythic, right? It's not grounded in a way that people like actually believe is something that you can like see in physical space and touch and interact with and wear in a way that, like, again, clothes it's really important to be able to do that. So you can work with people who are really cutting edge as a way of demonstrating to everyone the reality of what you're doing, a way of telling that story and selling that vision. And then also just like, technically de-risking, right? Can you actually sew this stuff? Is a non-trivial problem for certain operations.
Well, and like for you, Eric, I mean, just full disclosure, right? You've invested in this company, and so what were you looking for, or when this, when Zimri's company came across your radar, what was it that was like, okay, this is something we need to be investing in, and kind of what advice would you give other investors looking to help companies in this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of that was answered already, pretty much, where it was looking for a material that wasn't using plastic as part of the process, okay? Was looking for something that could be biodegradable if we wanted it to be, which it was at the time, where if people wanted it to be recyclable, it could be recyclable, where that seems to be the way the market's moving today. Looking for, in this case, a platform technology, something that could be used for many different applications, not just for one, like leather, per se. You could make a hard, a soft. You can vary what you're using it for, so that there's many applications, and that flexibility also in terms of being able to create something new that's novel, like Zimri just showed. Like that was pretty neat, something I didn't really anticipate when we made the decision, but something that in retrospect we could have anticipated, because that was the origin of kind of the product.
And given that, I do want to leave just a few minutes if anyone has questions.
Ooh, and I left out a drop-in replacement as well for the alternative, right? Something that could scale pretty easily.
So maybe my last question will be kind of how can we as a biotech community and an investor community kind of work together to find companies like the ones, both who have already been invested in, who need investments, kind of what is, you're right, like how do we work together to continue to support some of these companies?
I guess we're going to look at me, I suppose. How do we support the companies? I think it's both through our time and effort and our money, right? Like to actually support them financially is obviously important, but also to help them along and coach is important. Again, why I'm a big fan of IndieBio, because that's the approach that they take, and we like partnering with them because of that.
This is sort of coming at it from the other direction, but like coming from an academic background, you can ask the question like, how do you get people to work on applied stuff? This is another thing that is super gratifying working in fashion, is going from I can make a petri dish of something to I can make meters square of this and like watch it on somebody's body. That's awesome. And you know, like if you're doing it correctly, the time scale of this is like weeks or months. Like the show that we did this past Fashion Week went from showing up at a designer's office with sheets to stuff walking in like a month, right? And that was custom colors, custom patterns, custom materials. Like the fact that you can iterate this quickly, and this is also again like a platform problem, right? There are certain classes of these materials that you can't do this with, but the fact that you can go from that idea to something that somebody can actually wear in that amount of time is awesome. That's such a satisfying feeling, and that's something that showing to people that like, hey, take your idea that you're iterating on, that you're like finding the little tiny nooks and crannies and interesting bits of that, and like, come on, let's push that to scale. Let's like get that onto the real world. That's something that is both needed and feels awesome when you're actually able to do that.
I think my request is pretty Houston specific. We're in Houston, Texas, and if anyone knows that, it's the heart of the petrochemical industry. If you want to make real change, go to where the change needs to be made. That's Houston. And my request goes out to all the corporate, these petrochemical companies, these plastic companies that exist today. We need those heritage companies that were part of this problem to come with us on the solution. These are not bad people. These are people who, we need their help to unlock this transformation. We want to work with plastics companies. We want to work with, we have a drop-in replacement. We're using plastics technology, plastics machinery. We want their help. We want them to be part of this solution, part of this, what Houston calls the energy transition.
And they don't know what they don't know, so if you show them a better option, then that opens their eyes to different solutions.
And some of it's clouded by what they've seen historically, right? So the products that have been there don't suit their needs, so then it starts to become, as investors, as customers, we all become skeptical of the next product once we find out that the things that we've been using, even though it says it's sustainable, are actually 70% plastic. So kind of that education is true, not just for the consumer, but also for the corporates.
Yeah.
I have another really specific ask to anyone who's thinking of startups. Somebody please make a bio-based like chemical clearinghouse. I'm so tired of calling 300 different companies to find the bio-based version of like a standard commodity chemical that I know can be made from a bio-based version of this. Like that has to exist. There has to be a place where you can do, there has to be a Sigma, but everything is USDA 100% bio-based. Like that has to exist in the next 5 years. Somebody please make that. It would make my job a lot easier.
Free ideas.
That would be nice.
I'll take one question. Oh.
Yeah, no, I can.
Okay.
How do you look at the carbon footprint or the overall impact of this in comparison to e-commerce? So that type of upcycling.
Yeah, I have a sort of, with the recycling thing specifically is interesting. So one thing you can do with our stuff is you can basically make lossless pattern. So you can cut a pattern out and then take scrap and recycle it back into the process, like just plug it back into the input and like melt it back down basically and make new sheets. That's tricky to do. I mean, this is the problem with all these recycling approaches, is the fashion, the actual fashion supply chain is this incredibly weird, diffuse, globalized system. So figuring out how to successfully plug into that and finding the position where you fit if you're like trying to find this approach is really hard. Because the way people treat their like leather waste, which is a huge problem, 30, 50% loss fractions sometimes, is really tricky. So that would be the sort of one-to-one in terms of like physical material becoming a new type of thing. I think there's room for lots of people to approach these. Like, there's no reason not to do no reason not to do it all, right? Like, you're going to have to do all of it. There's no magic bullet to these problems. Like, these problems are complicated, and there's corner cases and weird elements of everything. So yeah, like let's figure out a way to, as much as we can, to couple these, right? I think the stuff about like regenerated fibers from, what is it? I forget the name of that company. The regenerated fibers from like stuff you can't resell or can't remake into something. That's a super cool idea. Like you just need to find every one of those loops and close them. Like every time there's a waste stream generated, close it. Every time there's, whether it's in the production space or the post-consumer space. And then the very end of this stack has to do with biodegradability, right? It's really annoying to do like scope 3+ comparisons, like cradle to grave with plastic-based stuff, because basically nobody actually prices that thing properly. And if they do price it, they price it as a carbon footprint, not as a like calculated cultural or sociological like pollution footprint, which is like a admittedly hard problem, fine. But being able to say like, look, we have something that goes to ground gracefully. And like, I've even seen cases where people have counted like, you can make this dumb version where you count the non-biodegradability of plastics as a good thing because it's locking carbon up, which is like this ridiculous argument. But there is some clarity and some development in the way you do some of this math that will help clarify this and help find the places where those loops are being closed in a way that is not actually accounted for properly.
Well, thank you all for your insights, and for everyone in the audience, definitely encourage you to feel the actual textures that we have, and thank you for your time.